I have worked as an archivist for the Galactic Conclave for 63 years. In that time, I have processed the credentials of warlords, emperors, high priests, and at least one individual who claimed to be a living god. The royal scanner identified each of them correctly, without hesitation, without error, and without mercy. The machine is older than my civilization's written language. It does not guess. It does not interpret. It reads the biological, psychological, and sociological markers of any living being and returns a precise designation: warrior, scholar, merchant, diplomat, criminal, prophet. It has never been wrong. Not once. Not in 10,000 years of continuous operation. I was proud of that record. I will admit that freely now, because pride is easier to confess after it has already been broken. The human delegation arrived on the 42nd day of the conclave session. I had read their file the night before, mostly out of professional habit. Earth was a young planet, barely 400 years into space travel, still arguing among themselves about resource distribution and territorial boundaries. By galactic standards, they were infants. The other species in the conclave had empires that stretched across dozens of systems. Some of them had been traveling between stars before humans had discovered fire. The file listed 5 delegates: a medical officer named Dr. Priya Anand, a structural engineer named Yusuf Brennan, a navigation specialist named Keiko Sato, a communications analyst named Eli Marsh, and finally, a man listed simply as representative, Marcus Hale. No title beyond that. No record of political office, no military rank. His personal history was ordinary, to the point of being almost invisible. He had grown up in a small city. He had worked, studied, failed at some things, succeeded at others. He had led a regional emergency response team for 11 years during a period of severe climate disruption on his continent. Before that, he had been a school teacher. I set the file down and thought nothing more of it. The scanning ceremony is not dramatic. It is simply procedure. Each delegate steps forward, stands inside the glass column at the center of the reception hall, and the scanner does its work within 3 seconds. The result is displayed on a panel visible to me and to the senior conclave officials seated in the gallery above. The delegate then receives their visitor identification badge and takes their seat. The first 4 humans passed through without incident. Doctor, engineer, navigator, analyst. The scanner named them cleanly, as it always did. I stamped their badges and handed them over with the standard welcome phrase, which I have said so many thousands of times that it no longer requires conscious thought. Then Marcus Hale stepped into the column. He was a man of average height. He had gray at his temples and a calm face, the kind of face that does not perform emotions for the benefit of observers. He wore a dark jacket that had clearly been pressed for the occasion, but still had a small fraying at the left cuff. He looked like a man who had come to fix something rather than represent something. The scanner ran its process. 3 seconds. 4. 5. I looked at the display panel. The machine was still working. In 63 years, I had never seen it take more than 4 seconds. I stood very still, the way one stands when something impossible is beginning to happen, and one is not yet certain whether to act or simply witness. At the 7-second mark, the display produced a result. King. Below that single word, in smaller text, a cascade of secondary classifications began to appear, something the scanner had never done before. It always gave one designation: clean, single, final. But now it was printing sub-designations as if it could not decide which was most accurate, and had resolved to list them all. Warrior, peacemaker, servant, judge, symbol, sacrifice. And then, at the very bottom, in the data field reserved for classification confidence level, a field that had displayed 100% every single day of my career. It displayed something I did not have a word for. Not 0. Not an error code. The field simply read, unresolvable. Marcus Hale stepped out of the column, looked at me pleasantly, and said, "Is there a problem?" "No," I said, because I was not yet ready to say yes. High Chancellor Oreth had been seated in the gallery. He was a tall being with pale silver skin and the particular expression of someone who had spent centuries being correct about things. He leaned forward and looked at the display panel with the expression one uses for a servant who has dropped something expensive. Archivist, he said, in a voice that carried effortlessly across the hall. Your equipment appears to be malfunctioning. The scanner does not malfunction, Chancellor, I said. The words came automatically, because they had always been true. Then explain the result. I could not. I told him I would investigate, and asked the delegation to be seated in the holding lounge while I did so. Marcus Hale nodded, as if this were entirely reasonable, and followed the others out. Senior Technician Yoss arrived within 20 minutes. She was young for her position, brilliant in the way that makes other technicians slightly nervous, and she had the focused expression of someone who has been told a thing cannot be broken and has arrived to prove otherwise. She ran diagnostic after diagnostic on the scanner. She checked its power systems, its sensor arrays, its classification matrix, its output display. She found nothing wrong. It's working perfectly, she told me, in a tone that suggested this was the worst possible news. Then why did it produce that result? She looked at the panel, where the designation was still sitting quietly, as confident as ever. I don't know yet, she said. But it didn't break. It processed him differently. Like it encountered something, it had enough data to name, but not enough categories to contain. I left her working and went to speak with Marcus Hale. He was sitting in the holding lounge with the other delegates, drinking the small cup of complimentary tea that the conclave provided to all visitors. The tea was not very good. He didn't seem to mind. He was looking out the tall window at the cityscape below, a city of towers and bridges, built by 40 different species over 3,000 years, all of it glittering in the afternoon light. I sat across from him and placed my datapad on the table between us. Mr. Hale, I said, I need to ask you a few questions. Of course, he said. What is your official title within the human government? Representative, that's all. You have no other designation, no rank, no formal position of authority? He thought about this for a moment, which surprised me. It seemed like a straightforward question. I've held positions, he said. I was a team leader for a long time during the climate years. People came to me when things went wrong. I don't know if that's authority exactly. It's more like being the person who agreed to stand at the front. The front of what? Whatever needed facing. I wrote this down, though I was not sure what I was writing it down for. The scanner designated you as a king, I said. Does that mean anything to you? He looked at me for a moment with an expression I could not fully read. It was not pride. It was closer to the look of someone who has been handed something heavy and is deciding whether to accept it. In our history, he said, the word king has meant a lot of different things. Some of them weren't good, but the ones we still remember, the ones we actually respected, they weren't kings because someone handed them a crown. They were kings because they carried things other people couldn't carry, and they did it without putting the weight onto someone else. Is that what you do? I asked. He smiled, just slightly. I try to, he said, most days. I returned to my office and spent the rest of the afternoon in the Galactic Archive, reading about human history. It was not comfortable reading. Humans had done things to one another that would have ended most civilizations permanently. They had fought wars over land, religion, resources, and sometimes, as far as I could tell, over almost nothing at all. They had inflicted enormous suffering on each other and on the other living creatures of their world. And yet, they had kept going. Every time they fell, they had gotten back up, often with the specific intention of not making the same mistake again, and often failing at that too, and getting up again after that. Their greatest leaders had not been their most powerful. They had been the ones willing to stand between their people and whatever was coming, not because they were certain of winning, but because someone had to, and they had decided that someone was them. I read about a man who had led his people out of centuries of enslavement by refusing to move from a seat on a vehicle. I read about a woman who had run into a burning building 11 times in one night to bring out people she had never met. I read about leaders who had given up personal safety, comfort, wealth, and sometimes their lives, simply because the people who followed them needed someone to believe in. The scanner, I began to understand, had not malfunctioned. It had been doing exactly what it was built to do. It had simply reached the edge of its own language. The following morning, High Chancellor Orith moved formally before the conclave to dismiss the human delegation. His argument was orderly and unpleasant. The scanner's inability to properly classify Representative Hale was evidence, he claimed, of Earth's unsuitability for conclave membership. A civilization that produced individuals the classification system could not process was either a civilization with something to hide, or one too primitive to be properly understood. Either way, he suggested, they did not belong here. The other delegates murmured. Some agreed. Some were simply uncertain, which in political bodies often amounts to the same thing. Marcus Hale stood up. He had not been recognized by the chair. He had not been given the floor. He simply stood, and something in the way he stood made the room go quiet. It was not loud. It was not aggressive. It was the quietness of a man who has been in enough serious situations to know that raising your voice is what you do when you have nothing else. He walked to the speaker's platform. No one stopped him. I am not entirely certain why. Perhaps they were curious. Perhaps they were caught off guard. Perhaps there was simply something about his bearing that suggested he had every right to be exactly where he was. He looked around the room slowly, as if he were actually seeing each of them, one by one. I'm not going to argue about the machine, he said. His voice was even, clear, and carried no particular effort. I'm going to tell you about my planet. He told them about Earth. Not the grand version. Not the version that humans put in formal documents to impress other civilizations. He told them the true version. He told them about the centuries of wars and the slow, painful work of building something better out of the wreckage. He told them about the climate crisis, and the years when it looked like the planet itself was giving up on them, and how they hadn't let it. He told them about the things humans had gotten terribly wrong, and the fact that they knew it, and were still trying to do better. We're not here because we think we're ready, he said. We're not here because we've solved everything. We're here because the galaxy is changing, and we want to be part of how it changes. We want to learn. We want to contribute, and we're willing to do the hard work, even the kind that doesn't have a guaranteed result. He paused. Your machine called me a king, he said. Where I come from, that word carries a lot of history, good and bad, but the version of it that we still believe in, the version that still means something, it isn't about power. It isn't about being above other people. It's about putting yourself between your people and the thing that frightens them, and standing there for as long as you have to. He looked at Oreth directly. I'm not asking you to be impressed by us. I'm asking you to look clearly at what we are, and decide honestly whether we deserve a seat at this table. We're not the strongest civilization in this room. We know that. But we've survived things that should have ended us, and every time we've survived, we've tried to come back better. That's all we're offering. The willingness to try. He stepped down from the platform and returned to his seat. The room was quiet for a long moment. The vote, when it came, was not unanimous, but it was enough. Earth was granted provisional membership in the Galactic Conclave. High Chancellor Oreth abstained rather than vote against it, which told me more about the speech than any applause would have. After the session ended, Marcus Hale found me near the entrance hall. He offered me his hand, which I had read was a human gesture of respect, and I took it. Thank you for the tea, he said. It wasn't very good. I am aware, I said. I will mention it to the catering staff. He smiled and left with his delegation, as quietly as he had arrived. I returned to my office and opened the scanner's taxonomy file. Under the designation King, I created a new sub-entry. I wrote carefully, because the archive is a permanent record, and I wanted to get it right. New classification note. Subtype designation. Human. A king, in this context, is not an elevation. It is a choice. It is the voluntary acceptance of weight that others cannot carry, without the expectation of reward or recognition. The royal scanner was not in error. It encountered a designation it had enough honesty to name, but not enough existing language to fully contain. The taxonomy has been amended accordingly. I saved the file, closed my datapad, and sat for a while in the quiet of my office. Outside, the city was full of 1,000 different species going about the complicated business of living alongside one another. Somewhere among them, 5 humans from a small and stubborn planet were having their first evening in a galaxy that was, slowly and imperfectly, learning to make room for them. I thought about the scanner sitting in the reception hall, patient and precise, waiting for the next delegate to step into its column. I thought about what Yos had said. It didn't break. It just ran out of words. I added one final line to the log entry, sealed it with my official stamp, and left it for the permanent record. The scanner has since been asked to reevaluate its designation for Marcus Hale. It has returned the same result each time. I have stopped asking it to change its answer. In 63 years, it has never been wrong. I see no reason to assume it has started now.